Influence, the Psychology of Persuasion, Robert Cialdini. Chapter 1. Levers of Influence. Power. Tools of the Trades. The study of persuasion begins not in the boardroom or the marketplace, but in the natural world, observing the rigid, mechanical behaviors of species far older than our own. Consider the mother turkey, a creature whose maternal instincts appear driven by a singular, unvarying signal. Her entire parenting drive, the warming, cleaning, and protecting of her young, is triggered not by the chick's smell or appearance, but by the specific cheep-cheep sound it makes. Ethologists have demonstrated that if a natural enemy, such as a polecat, is made to emit this precise sound, the mother will embrace it. Conversely, if her own chick falls silent, she may abandon or even attack it. This phenomenon, known as a fixed action pattern, reveals a fundamental biological truth. Complex sequences of behavior can be activated by a single solitary feature, a trigger. In humans, a parallel form of automaticity exists, a mechanism that can be described as click, run. Just as the turkey responds mechanically to a sound, we often respond mechanically to psychological triggers. This was elegantly demonstrated in an experiment involving a library photocopier, where a request to cut in line was granted far more frequently simply because the requester used the word because, even when no valid reason followed. The word itself flipped a switch in the listeners' minds, activating a compliance response. While we like to believe our decisions are based on careful analysis, the reality is that we often rely on mental shortcuts. We see this in the behavior of vacationers who, ignorant of turquoise valuation, eagerly bought jewelry only after its price was accidentally doubled. To them, the inflated price triggered a expensive equals good stereotype, substituting a complex value assessment with a simple, albeit flawed, rule of thumb. We rely on these shortcuts, these stereotypes and rules of thumb, because the complexity of modern life demands it. We lack the time, energy, and capacity to analyze every aspect of the people and situations we encounter. Instead, we bet on the odds, using single features like price, expert status, or social consensus to guide our actions efficiently. This click-run responding is a survival mechanism, allowing us to navigate a rapidly moving world. However, this efficiency comes with a price: vulnerability. Just as a predator might mimic a mating signal to lure prey to its doom, human profiteers can exploit our automatic responses. They learn to simulate the trigger features, the appearance of authority, the sensation of scarcity, the rhythm of reciprocity, to activate our compliance tapes for their own benefit. These exploiters employ a strategy akin to the Japanese martial art of jiu-jitsu. Rather than opposing an opponent's strength with their own, they utilize the natural forces of gravity and leverage. In the realm of influence, the profiteer uses the power of psychological principles to flip the target. They do not force compliance. They arrange the situation so that compliance seems the natural, logical outcome. A prime example of this leverage is the contrast principle, a quirk of human perception that alters how we view the difference between two things presented in succession. If a person lifts a light object and then a heavy one, the second will feel heavier than if it had been lifted alone. This principle works quietly but powerfully in commerce. A clothier, for instance, learns to sell the expensive suit before the accessories. After a customer has committed to a $2,000 suit, a $200 sweater seems trivial by comparison. If the order were reversed, the sweater would appear exorbitantly expensive. Real estate agents employ the same tactic by showing setup properties, dilapidated houses at inflated prices, before revealing the genuine homes they intend to sell. The contrast makes the target house appear radiant and reasonably priced, sparking a desire that might otherwise have remained dormant. Automobile dealers, too, are masters of this perceptual jujitsu. They wait until the final price of a car has been negotiated before suggesting accessories. In the wake of a 5-figure commitment, the cost of a stereo or undercoating seems like pocket change. The customer, lulled by the contrast, agrees to a series of small additions that ultimately inflate the bill significantly, all while believing they are making rational choices. The danger of these levers of influence lies in their invisibility. We walk away from the transaction feeling that we acted of our own accord, unaware that our natural tendency to simplify the world has been weaponized against us. We are efficient, yes, but in our haste to respond to the triggers of our environment, we risk becoming the architects of our own exploitation, responding to the mechanical cheep-cheep of the profiteer with the blind devotion of the mother turkey. Chapter 2. Reciprocation. The old give and take. A university professor once launched a small experiment that inadvertently revealed the mechanical nature of human compliance. He sent Christmas cards to a list of absolute strangers. While he anticipated some confusion, the response was overwhelming. Holiday cards flooded his mailbox from people who had never met him, nor even heard of him. Most didn't inquire into his identity. They simply received a card and, clicking into an automatic response, sent one in return. This small event illustrates the potent reach of the rule of reciprocation, a principle stating that we must repay in kind what another person has provided for us. This rule is so deeply ingrained that it creates a sense of obligation that permeates human culture. Indeed, archaeologists and anthropologists have suggested that this web of indebtedness is what allowed our species to evolve into highly efficient social units, enabling the division of labor and the exchange of goods. It allowed an individual to give away resources like food or care with the confidence that they were not being lost, but invested. This system of future obligation is not merely a social nicety. It is a mechanism that offers a distinct competitive advantage to societies that adhere to it. Consequently, we are trained from childhood to comply with the rule or face severe social sanctions. Labels like moocher or ingrate are reserved for those who take without giving, and the fear of such stigma drives us to go to great lengths to avoid being seen as freeloaders. It is this very drive that makes us vulnerable to those who would exploit the rule for profit. The power of the rule was starkly demonstrated in an experiment involving art appreciation. Subjects were asked to rate paintings alongside a fellow rater, Joe, who was actually an assistant to the experimenter. In some cases, Joe did the subject a small, unsolicited favor. He left the room and returned with 2 Cokes, one for himself and one for the subject. In other cases, he returned empty-handed. Later, Joe asked the subjects to buy raffle tickets. The results were undeniable. Subjects who had received the soft drink bought twice as many tickets as those who had not. The feeling of indebtedness completely overrode other factors, such as whether the subject actually liked Joe. Even those who disliked him bought just as many tickets as those who liked him, provided he had given them a Coke first. The rule of reciprocation was powerful enough to overwhelm the influence of personal affection. This overpowering nature of the rule is evident in the highest levels of politics. Elected officials often vote contrary to their own stated positions or their constituents' interests, not because of a change of heart, but to return a favor to a bill's sponsor. The ability to pass legislation is often less about political savvy and more about calling in debts owed from previous favors. This dynamic extends to the relationship between corporations and lawmakers, where contributions and gifts create a sense of obligation that, despite claims of independence, undeniably influences decision-making. On the international stage, the reciprocal removal of nuclear missiles, a concession masked as a hardline victory, was the true mechanism that resolved the Cuban Missile Crisis, saving the world from potential destruction while the public remained largely unaware of the exchange. The commercial world also thrives on the free sample, a tactic that releases the natural indebting force of a gift while appearing to be merely informative. A classic example is the bug used by Amway Corporation, a collection of household products left with a customer for a trial period at no cost. When the salesperson returns to collect the kit, the customer, having used a portion of the products, often feels the trap snap shut. The rule of reciprocation dictates that they cannot simply return the largely consumed products without offering something in return, usually an order. The power of this technique lies in the fact that the gift need not be requested to trigger the obligation. We are conditioned to accept gifts to avoid being rude, but in doing so, we accept the debt that accompanies them. This force is magnified when the gift is personalized. A generic favor has weight, but a favor customized to the recipient's specific needs or preferences supercharges the obligation. In the hospitality industry, a manager who goes out of his way to solve a specific, minor problem for a guest, like buying tennis rackets from a local store when the hotels are in use, can generate loyalty far exceeding that of a guest who experiences a flawless but impersonal stay. The personalized response to a mistake is perceived as a significant service, warranting a significant return in future business. Crucially, the rule enforces uninvited debts. A person can trigger a feeling of indebtedness in us by doing an uninvited favor. The Disabled American Veterans Organization, for instance, found that including unsolicited address labels in their donation requests nearly doubled their success rate. The rule states we should repay what we receive, but it does not require us to have asked for the gift in the first place. The obligation to receive is as strong as the obligation to repay, limiting our ability to choose our creditors. Paradoxically, while the rule is designed to promote equal exchange, it can be exploited to trigger unequal exchanges. The social discomfort of being in debt is so heavy that people are often willing to give back much more than they received just to rid themselves of the burden. In the raffle ticket experiment, Joe's 50-cent investment in a Coke yielded a 500% return from the subjects. In everyday life, a small favor like a jump start for a car can lead a person to lend their vehicle to a virtual stranger, resulting in significant loss. The psychological cost of indebtedness often outweighs the material value of the exchange. The rule's application is not limited to the exchange of items or services. It also governs concessions. This is the basis of the rejection then retreat technique, also known as door in the face. If a requester wants you to agree to a certain demand, they can increase their chances of success by first making a larger request that you are likely to refuse. Once you have rejected the extreme demand, they retreat to the smaller request they ostensibly wanted all along. You perceive this retreat as a concession, and the rule of reciprocation dictates that you should respond with a concession of your own, compliance. This was illustrated by a Boy Scout who, after being refused in his attempt to sell $5 circus tickets, retreated to selling $1 chocolate bars. The customer, having refused the big request, felt obligated to agree to the smaller one, buying unwanted candy simply because the boy had made a concession. This technique combines the power of reciprocity with the contrast principle. The smaller request seems even smaller when preceded by a much larger one. This combination may explain the baffling decision by the Nixon administration to approve the Watergate break-in. The eventually approved plan, risky and ill-conceived as it was merely a bare-bones version compared to the proposer's earlier, massively expensive and even more outrageous schemes involving kidnapping and mugging squads. By the time the proposer retreated to the $250,000 burglary plan, it was viewed as a concession, a little something to be granted in return for his repeated retreats. One might worry that using such a manipulative tactic would backfire, causing the victim to resent the arrangement or fail to follow through. However, research suggests the opposite. Victims of the rejection then retreat tactic are not only more likely to say yes, but are also more likely to carry out the request and volunteer for future ones. This occurs because the act of concession-making instills a sense of responsibility and satisfaction in the victim. They feel they have successfully negotiated the requester down, giving them a sense of ownership over the final agreement. A person who feels responsible for a contract is more likely to live up to it. Defending against the rule of reciprocation is challenging because the rule is so essential to social functioning. We cannot simply reject every favor or gift, as we would risk insulting well-meaning friends and stifling the beneficial exchange of kindness. The solution lies not in rejection, but in redefinition. We should accept initial favors in good faith, recognizing the obligation they entail. However, if we perceive that the favor is merely a compliance tactic, a trick designed to extract a profit, we must mentally redefine the action. A free inspection that is actually a high-pressure sales pitch is not a gift, it is a sales device. The rule of reciprocation says that favors should be met with favors, but it does not require that tricks be met with favors. By perceiving the act for what it is, we free ourselves from the obligation to repay and are even justified in exploiting the exploiter's attempt, taking the gift without the guilt. Chapter 3. Liking, the friendly thief. The professional exploitation of the liking rule is often subtle, yet its premise is undeniably simple. We prefer to say yes to the requests of people we know and like. While this rule typically governs our interactions with friends and neighbors, compliance professionals have learned to monetize this natural social bond. Consider the struggle of science communicators to persuade the public regarding Darwin's theory of evolution. Logical arguments and mountains of data often fail to dislodge emotionally held beliefs. However, researchers found a shortcut through the resistance: the liking rule. When the message of evolution was paired with a widely liked celebrity, such as George Clooney or Emma Watson, acceptance of the theory rose significantly. The emotional connection to the messenger overrode the intellectual resistance to the message. This phenomenon explains why a top attorney noted that in medical malpractice suits, the quality of the doctor-patient relationship is often the deciding factor. People simply do not sue doctors they like. Liking for profit. The commercial mastery of this principle is perhaps best exemplified by the Tupperware Corporation. The home party model is a carefully constructed compliance setting where the traditional salesperson is moved to the background. In their place stands a friend, the party hostess. She chats, serves refreshments, and smiles, but her role is pivotal. She receives a cut of every sale. The true solicitor is not the stranger demonstrating the plastic bowls, but a friend to every person in the room. The psychological pressure is immense. To buy is to support a friend, and to refuse is to reject that friendship. The strength of this social bond has been measured to be twice as effective as the actual preference for the product itself. Even when a friend cannot be physically present, the principle can be weaponized. The endless chain method used by companies like Shackley relies on customers to provide the names of friends who would appreciate the product. When the salesperson calls a new prospect, they come armed with a powerful weapon. "Your friend Mr. Smith suggested I call you." Turning away, the salesperson now feels like turning away Mr. Smith. The friendly thief need not be in the room to steal a compliance decision. Their name alone suffices. Strategic friendship, making friends to influence people. When a pre-existing friendship is not available to exploit, the compliance professional's strategy shifts. They must get us to like them, and quickly. Joe Girard, recognized by the Guinness Book of World Records as the world's greatest car salesman, built a fortune on this simple formula. He offered customers two things: a fair price and someone they liked to buy from. Girard's success forces us to ask what generates liking. Social scientists have identified several reliable factors. Why do I like you? Let me list the reasons. Physical attractiveness. We are often unaware of the extent to which good looks influence our judgment. This is the halo effect, where one positive characteristic dominates the way a person is viewed in all other respects. Research consistently shows that we automatically assign favorable traits, talent, kindness, honesty, intelligence, to attractive individuals. This bias permeates every layer of society. Attractive politicians get more votes, while voters deny the influence. Attractive job candidates get hired over more qualified rivals, and attractive criminals receive lighter sentences. Compliance professionals exploit this by grooming themselves to activate this click-run response, knowing that good looks are a shortcut to credibility and liking. Similarity. If physical beauty is not an option, professionals turn to similarity. We like people who are like us. This holds true whether the similarity is in opinions, personality, background, or lifestyle. Car salespeople are trained to mirror their customers. If they see camping gear in a trade-in, they mention their love for the outdoors. If they see golf balls, they talk about their golf game. Even trivial similarities like sharing a birthday or a first name can skyrocket compliance rates. Mirror and match training instructs salespeople to copy a customer's posture, mood, and verbal style, creating a synthetic bond of similarity that lowers defenses and opens wallets. Compliments. The hunger for flattery is a human universal. Joe Girard sent monthly cards to his thousands of former customers that said nothing more than, "I like you." While it may seem impersonal, Girard understood that we are phenomenal suckers for praise. Experiments show that men who received positive comments from someone needing a favor liked the flatterer best, even when they knew the praise was instrumental. Remarkably, the praise did not even have to be true to work. Inaccurate praise produced just as much liking as accurate praise. Contact and cooperation. Familiarity typically breeds liking. We prefer the reverse image of our own faces because that is what we see in the mirror, while our friends prefer the true image they see daily. However, contact alone is not enough. The school desegregation experiments revealed that throwing different groups together in a competitive environment, like a standard classroom, actually increases hostility. The critical factor is not just contact, but cooperation. This was demonstrated in the Robbers Cave experiment, where researchers separated boys into two warring tribes, the Eagles and the Rattlers. Hostility was easily manufactured through competition, but resolving it required more than just bringing the boys together. Peace was only achieved when the researchers engineered crises, a broken water supply, a stuck truck, that forced the boys to work together toward a common goal. This principle of cooperative success turned enemies into allies. In the world of interrogation, this dynamic plays out in the good cop, bad cop routine. The good cop positions himself as a savior protecting the suspect from the bad cop, creating an illusion of partnership and cooperation that often elicits a confession. Conditioning and association. The nature of bad news infects the teller. We have a natural tendency to dislike a person who brings us unpleasant information, even if they did not cause it. Television weathermen are frequently cursed, threatened, and blamed for the weather they merely report. Conversely, being associated with good things generates liking. The luncheon technique discovered by Gregory Razran showed that people became fonder of political statements shown to them while they were eating. Compliance professionals use this by linking their products to celebrity endorsers, current cultural trends, or the Olympics. This principle explains the behavior of sports fans. The intense connection to a team is not mere entertainment, it is an attempt to associate oneself with success. When the home team wins, fans say, "We won," basking in reflected glory to boost their own prestige. When the team loses, the pronoun shifts to "they lost," distancing the self from failure. This desire to associate with glory is most prevalent in those with a fragile self-concept, who seek to strengthen their image through the accomplishments of others. Defense. Defending against the liking rule is difficult because its many factors, attractiveness, familiarity, association, operate unconsciously. We cannot vigilantly block every attempt to make us like someone. Instead, we must let the factors work, but recognize when they have worked too well. Our alert signal is the feeling that we like a salesperson more than we should under the circumstances. If we find ourselves feeling a warm friendship toward a person we met only 20 minutes ago, we must pause. We must mentally separate the person from the product. We are buying the car, not the dealer. By isolating the merits of the deal from the charm of the requester, we neutralize the friendly thief. Chapter 4. Social Proof. Truths are us. The principle of social proof is as potent as it is simple. We determine what is correct by finding out what other people think is correct. This principle applies to the way we decide what constitutes proper behavior. We view an action as more correct in a given situation to the degree that we see others performing it. This tendency is usually functional. Typically, if a lot of people are doing something, it is the right thing to do. The feature of social proof that provides a convenient shortcut for determining how to behave is, however, also its greatest vulnerability. It makes those who use the shortcut susceptible to the attacks of profiteers who lie in wait along its path. The principle of social proof. The power of social proof is demonstrated in something as seemingly trivial as canned laughter on television shows. Almost everyone claims to dislike it. We find it annoying, obvious, and phony. Yet television executives continue to use it because it works. Experiments have found that the use of a laugh track causes audiences to laugh longer and more often when humorous material is presented and to rate the material as funnier. The laugh track capitalizes on our automatic response to social evidence. The sound of others laughing triggers our own laughter, even when we know the sound is artificial. We are so accustomed to taking the humorous reactions of others as evidence of what deserves a laugh that we can be made to respond to the sound and not the substance of the real thing. This mechanical response is not limited to comedy. Bartenders often salt their tip jars with a few dollar bills at the beginning of an evening to simulate tips left by prior customers, creating the impression that tipping with folding money is proper barroom etiquette. Church ushers sometimes salt collection baskets for the same reason. Evangelical preachers are known to seed their audiences with ringers who are rehearsed to come forward at a specific time to give witness and donations. In each case, the aim is to manufacture social evidence that will trigger an automatic compliance response in the observers. People power. The influence of social proof extends into the most serious of domains. A research team infiltrated a doomsday cult, the Guardians, who believed a flood would destroy the world on a specific date. When the predicted flood did not occur, the group's reaction was initially baffling. Rather than disbanding in shame, the members, who had previously shunned publicity, suddenly became zealous missionaries, seeking to convert as many people as possible. The reason lay in the principle of social proof. The physical evidence, the lack of a flood, had undercut their belief system. To maintain their faith, they needed to generate social evidence. If they could persuade others to believe, their own belief would be validated. The greater the number of people who find any idea correct, the more the idea will be perceived as correct. After the deluge. The behavior of the Guardians highlights a key optimizing condition of social proof: uncertainty. We are most likely to look to and accept the actions of others as correct when we are unsure of ourselves or the situation is ambiguous. When the flood failed to appear, the cultists were plunged into deep uncertainty. The only way to resolve it was to create a new reality through the agreement of others. This drive to find social confirmation is particularly strong when the situation is unfamiliar. Cause of death: uncertain tie. The role of uncertainty in social proof offers a chilling explanation for the phenomenon of bystander inaction in emergencies. The classic case of Kitty Genovese, who was murdered while 38 of her neighbors watched and did nothing, was originally attributed to urban apathy. However, social psychologists Latané and Dali proposed a different explanation, the pluralistic ignorance effect. In an ambiguous situation, such as hearing a scream that might be a seizure or a marital spat, each bystander looks to others to see if they are acting. Because everyone else is also looking around calmly to gauge the situation, the event is interpreted as a non-emergency. Latané and Dali tested this by staging emergencies. They found that a victim was much more likely to be helped by a lone bystander than by a group. When alone, an individual has only their own senses to rely on. When in a group, the presence of other non-reacting individuals leads to a state of pluralistic ignorance where no one defines the situation as an emergency. The danger, then, is not that safety in numbers exists, but that there is often danger in numbers when the need for help is unclear. Scientific approach. The scientific understanding of this process leads to actionable advice for emergency victims. If you are in a crisis in a crowd, you must reduce the uncertainty of the bystanders. Do not simply scream, specifically call out "help." Even more effectively, isolate one individual. Point to them and say, "You, sir, in the blue jacket, I need help. Call an ambulance." This dispels the pluralistic ignorance by assigning responsibility and defining the situation as an emergency. Once one person acts, the social proof switches direction and others are likely to join in the rescue. De-victimizing yourself. The lesson for the victim is clear. Reduce the ambiguity. Do not allow bystanders to conclude that the situation is not serious. By clearly stating your state and assigning a specific task to a specific person, you utilize the power of social proof, the need for clarity, in your favor rather than letting it work against you through pluralistic ignorance. Monkey me, monkey. Do. A second optimizing condition for social proof is similarity. We are more inclined to follow the lead of those who are similar to us. This was illustrated in a study where wallet return rates were manipulated by a letter found inside the lost wallet. When the letter was written by someone who seemed similar to the finder, a standard English speaker, the return rate was high. When the letter was written by a dissimilar person, a foreigner with broken English, the return rate dropped. Monkey die. This principle of persuasion takes a darker turn in the phenomenon of copycat suicides. Sociologist David Phillips discovered that immediately following a highly publicized suicide story, the number of people who die in commercial airline crashes and automobile accidents increases dramatically. Phillips argued this is due to the Werther effect, named after Goethe's novel which sparked a wave of suicides in 18th century Europe. Troubled individuals, reading of a suicide, decide to end their own lives in a similar way. Some disguise their suicide as an accident to protect their reputation or insurance benefits, leading to the spike in crashes. Crucially, the data supports the similarity factor. When a young person's suicide is publicized, young drivers crash. When an older person's suicide is reported, older drivers crash. The publicizing of a suicide triggers a wave of imitation among those who feel similar to the victim. This grim reality suggests that media reporting of suicides acts as a potent form of social proof, legitimizing the act for vulnerable, similar others. Monkey Island. The horrific mass suicide at Jonestown, where over 900 members of the People's Temple drank poison, can be understood through the convergence of uncertainty and similarity. The cult members were in a jungle in Guyana, a completely alien environment, uncertainty. They had no one to look to for guidance but each other, similarity. When the leader, Jim Jones, gave the order, the initial compliance of the most fanatical members provided the social proof that this is what we do. In the absence of any outside, contrary social evidence, the herd mentality took over, and the group mechanically followed the lead of their peers to their deaths. Defense. Defending against social proof requires recognizing when the data is in error. There are two main types of situations where the social proof autopilot fails. The first is when the social evidence has been purposely falsified by exploiters. The clackers in the opera house or the average person testimonials in commercials that are clearly staged. In these cases, we must simply recognize the fake evidence and disconnect the autopilot. The second type of error is more subtle, when an innocent natural error produces snowballing social proof that is factually incorrect. This is the Singapore bank scenario, where a bus strike caused a crowd to gather outside a bank which passers-by mistook for a bank run, causing an actual bank run. In these instances, we must never trust the autopilot fully. We need to look up and around periodically to ensure that the social evidence is in sync with objective reality. We must stop watching the crowd and start watching the facts. Chapter 5. Authority, Directed Deference. The directive to follow an expert is deeply ingrained in the human psyche, and for good reason. In a complex world, relying on those with superior knowledge or status is often a shortcut to effective decision-making. This principle was illustrated vividly by the British government's Behavioural Insights team when they sought to increase charitable donations among high-earning investment bankers. They found that a standard request for a day's salary yielded a modest compliance rate. However, when the request was accompanied by a letter from the bank's CEO, compliance more than doubled. The CEO possessed the twin pillars of influence. He was in authority, holding power over the employees' careers, and he was an authority, presumably knowledgeable about the charity's worth. When these two forms of power combine, the pressure to comply becomes nearly irresistible. The power of authority pressure. The sheer magnitude of this pressure is perhaps best documented in the chilling studies conducted by Professor Stanley Milgram. In his memory experiments, a volunteer teacher was instructed to administer electric shocks to a learner for every wrong answer. As the errors mounted, the intensity of the shocks increased, as did the learner's audible agony, from grunts to screams to pleas for release. Yet, despite the victim's suffering and their own extreme distress, the majority of teachers continued to pull the levers, delivering dangerous levels of electricity simply because a lab-coated researcher calmly ordered them to proceed. Before the experiment, psychiatrists and students alike predicted that fewer than 1% of participants would go to the maximum voltage. In reality, 65% did. The subjects were not sadists. They were ordinary citizens trapped in a web of deep-seated obedience to authority. They were unable to defy the commands of the man in charge, even when those commands violated their fundamental moral conscience. This extreme willingness to submit to authority is not limited to the laboratory. It echoes in real-world tragedies, such as the case of S. Brian Wilson, a protester whose legs were severed by a Navy munitions train. The civilian crew, under orders not to stop, ran him down despite seeing him on the tracks. Later, the crew sued Wilson for the mental anguish his body caused them by forcing them to carry out their orders, a stark testament to the blinding power of the command hierarchy, the allures and dangers of blind obedience. This deference to authority is not merely a weakness, it is a systemic necessity. A multi-layered authority structure allows for the development of complex societies, resource production, and social control. From birth, we are trained to believe that obedience is right and disobedience is wrong, a lesson reinforced by parental instruction, religious teachings, and legal systems. Consequently, we often click into a mode of automatic obedience. We stop thinking and start reacting. This mechanical deference becomes dangerous when it infiltrates high-stakes environments like medicine. In the rigid hierarchy of a hospital, a doctor's word is rarely challenged. This can lead to what aviation experts call captainitis, where a clear error by a leader goes uncorrected by subordinates. In one famous medical case, a physician ordered eardrops for a patient's infected right ear, but abbreviated the instructions to place in our ear. The duty nurse, suspending her own professional intelligence, promptly administered the medication into the patient's rectum. The symbol of authority had overridden the logic of the situation. Connotation, not content. The influence of authority is so potent that we often react to the symbols of authority rather than the substance. We are vulnerable to the veneer of power. Con artists understand this perfectly. They drape themselves in titles, uniforms, and expensive trappings to trigger our compliance click-run mechanisms. When we encounter these symbols, we often do not question the reality behind them. Titles. Titles are simultaneously the most difficult and the easiest symbols of authority to acquire. While earning a genuine medical or doctoral degree takes years, adopting the label takes mere seconds. Yet, the label alone is often enough to produce deference. Research has shown that someone introduced as a professor is perceived as physically taller than when introduced as a student. This connection between size and status is deep-seated. In many animal hierarchies, the larger male dominates. Humans, it seems, counterfeit this biological rule by granting stature to those with impressive titles. The power of a title to induce mechanical obedience was terrifyingly demonstrated in a study of hospital nurses. A researcher, calling anonymously and claiming to be a physician, ordered nurses to administer an unauthorized and dangerous dose of a drug to a patient. Despite policies against phone prescriptions and the obvious danger labeled on the bottle, 95% of the nurses moved to comply. The mere word doctor was sufficient to suppress their training, their policy knowledge, and their judgment. Clothes. The cloak of authority is equally persuasive. In a study led by social psychologist Leonard Bickman, a young man stopped pedestrians and ordered them to give a dime to a stranger for a parking meter. When dressed in ordinary street clothes, his orders were largely ignored. However, when he wore a security guard's uniform, compliance skyrocketed. The uniform signaled authority, and people obeyed without questioning his actual legitimacy. This automatic deference extends to the business suit. In Texas, a man wearing a well-tailored suit was followed across the street against a red light by 3.5 times as many pedestrians as when he was dressed in work clothes. The suits of society act as shepherds, and we, the flock, follow them blindly into traffic. Trappings, status symbols like luxury automobiles also command a special kind of respect. In a study of driver aggression, motorists waited significantly longer to honk at a stalled luxury car than at an economy car. Indeed, many drivers sat patiently behind the prestigious vehicle, while the economy car was subjected to immediate and aggressive honking. Interestingly, when students were asked to predict their behavior in such a situation, they insisted they would be less patient with the luxury car, once again underestimating the invisible grip that authority status holds over their actions. Defense. Defending against the authority principle is challenging because we typically misperceive its profound impact. We do not want to reject authority entirely, as experts often provide valuable counsel. The key is to remove the element of surprise and practice a form of mental jujitsu. We must learn to recognize when we are reacting to symbols rather than substance. To do this, we can ask 2 critical questions. Authoritative authority. The first question is this authority truly an expert? This forces us to examine the credentials of the person and their relevance to the topic at hand. It moves us away from the empty title or the expensive suit and toward a verification of genuine knowledge. We must distinguish between relevant and irrelevant authority. An actor who plays a doctor on TV may have a famous face and a doctor in his character's name, but he possesses no medical expertise. By asking this question, we strip away the veneer and focus on the evidence of true competence, sly sincerity. Even if we determine the authority as an expert, we must ask a second question. How truthful can I expect this expert to be? Expertise does not guarantee honesty. We must consider the expert's incentives. Compliance professionals often use a subtle tactic to gain our trust. They argue slightly against their own interests on a minor point to establish credibility for the major point that follows. A master waiter named Vincent exemplified this strategy. When serving large parties, he would inevitably dissuade the first person ordering from choosing a particular dish, whispering that it was not as good tonight as usual. He would then recommend a slightly cheaper alternative. This maneuver established him as both knowledgeable and honest. He effectively proved he was on the customer's side. Once his credibility was established, he would proceed to upsell expensive wines and desserts. The customers, disarmed by his apparent sincerity and proven expertise, followed his recommendations explicitly, resulting in a higher bill and a larger tip. Vincent leveraged the appearance of honesty to maximize his ultimate profit, teaching us that the most dangerous authority is the one who has skillfully engineered our trust. Chapter 6. Scarcity. The Rule of the Few. A friend who mediates marital disputes once shared a persistent problem. Often, negotiations would stall at the very end, deadlocked over a final term. Whether the dispute concerned a major asset or a trivial concession, the parties would dig in, threatening to derail the entire settlement and return to the scorched earth of the courtroom. The mediator found a linguistic key to unlocking these impasses. Instead of presenting the final offer as an opportunity to be gained, "If you agree to this, we have a deal," she began framing it as a possession already in hand that was at risk of being lost. "We have a deal. All you have to do is agree to this." The success rate of this small shift was nearly absolute. The psychological engine driving this compliance is the heavy weight of potential loss. People are far more motivated by the thought of losing something of value than by the thought of gaining something of equal value. This is the heart of the scarcity principle. Less is best, and loss is worst. The instinct to protect against loss is wired deeply into the human nervous system. Evolution favors the creature that prioritizes holding on to its existing resources over the gamble for new ones. A lost meal is a hunger pang, but a lost territory can be a death sentence. In the modern world, this translates into a powerful rule of valuation. That which is rare is valuable. Collectors understand this intuitively. A precious mistake, a double-struck coin or a stamp with an inverted image, is prized precisely because of its rarity. The flaw, which technically ruins the design, creates a scarcity that creates worth. This principle governs our daily interruptions. We will cut short a face-to-face conversation with an interesting person to answer a phone call from an unknown number. The caller has a quality the person in the room lacks: potential unavailability. If we do not answer now, the connection may be severed forever. We risk losing the information, however trivial, that the call might carry. The fear of missing out overrides the certainty of the present moment. In the realm of health, messages advising women to perform self-examinations for breast cancer are significantly more effective when phrased in terms of what stands to be lost, the chance of early detection, rather than what stands to be gained. The threat of loss captures our attention and mobilizes action where the promise of gain merely drifts by. Limited numbers. Compliance professionals have long harvested the power of this principle through the limited number tactic. A customer is informed that a certain product is in short supply and cannot be guaranteed to last. The realization that an item is dwindling creates a sudden spike in its desirability. During undercover research in an appliance store, the effectiveness of this maneuver was on daily display. A couple might be casually examining a washing machine showing moderate interest. A salesperson would approach and deliver the blow. "I see you're looking at this model. It's a fine machine, but unfortunately I sold the last one just 20 minutes ago. I believe we are completely out of stock." The customer's demeanor invariably shifts. The appliance, now unavailable, becomes instantly more attractive. Disappointment registers on their faces. Typically, they ask if there is any chance a unit might be hiding in the back room or a warehouse. The salesperson agrees to check, but only after extracting a commitment. "If I can find one, are you prepared to take it right now?" The customers, trapped by their own heightened desire for the lost item, agree. When the salesperson returns with the miraculously found inventory, the customers are holding a pen ready to sign. The scarcity principle has transformed a casual browser into a committed buyer by threatening the loss of the opportunity. Time limits. A cousin to the limited number tactic is the deadline technique, where an official time limit is placed on the customer's opportunity. The message is simple: now or never. We see this in movie advertisements screaming, "Exclusive limited engagement ends soon," and in the high-pressure pitch of the door-to-door solicitor who claims he is in the neighborhood for one day only. The intent is to collapse the time available for rational thought, forcing a decision based on the panic of losing the chance. One face-to-face sales operation instructed its trainees to tell prospects that they could visit a family only once. If the customer decided to buy later, they would be ineligible. This was, of course, a fabrication. The company would happily take a check any day of the week. But the purpose of the lie was to energize the scarcity principle. By simulating a vanishing opportunity, the seller creates an artificial emergency, scaring the prospect into an immediate purchase to avoid the pain of future regret. Psychological reactance. The power of scarcity stems from two sources. The first is our learned reliance on shortcuts. We know that difficult-to-obtain items are generally better than easy-to-get ones. The second source is more visceral. As opportunities become less available, we lose freedoms, and we hate to lose freedoms we already possess. This resistance is explained by psychological reactance theory. When free choice is limited or threatened, the need to retain our freedoms makes us want them significantly more. We react against the interference by desiring the forbidden item with increased intensity. This pattern emerges fiercely in the terrible twos, a stage of childhood marked by a newfound sense of autonomy. 2-year-olds are discovering they are individuals separate from their environment, and they test the boundaries of their freedom relentlessly. If you put a toy behind a barrier, a toddler will defy the obstacle to reach it, not just for the toy, but to assert the freedom to have it. A similar surge of reactance occurs in the teenage years, another period of emerging individuality. For adolescents, parental authority is the barrier, and the fight to maintain rights and privileges becomes central to their identity. Adult reactance: love, guns, and suds. In adults, this reactance often goes underground, surfacing only when significant freedoms are threatened. A striking example occurred in Kennesaw, Georgia, where the town council passed a law requiring every adult head of household to own a gun and ammunition. While the law was intended to enforce ownership, reactance theory would predict that residents would resist this encroachment on their freedom not to own a gun. Indeed, few locals complied. However, gun sales in Kennesaw boomed. The buyers were visitors from other towns, lured by the publicity to exercise a freedom that had not been restricted for them. The law failed to compel the locals, whose freedom was threatened, but attracted outsiders, whose freedom was intact. A different manifestation of reactance appeared in Dade County, Florida, when an ordinance banned phosphate detergents to protect the environment. Miamians didn't just passively switch brands, they engaged in soap smuggling, driving to neighboring counties to hoard 20-year supplies of the forbidden cleaners. More fascinating was the shift in perception. Residents began to rate phosphate detergents as gentler, more effective, and better whiteners than they had before the ban. Denied access to the product, they didn't just want it more. They convinced themselves it was a superior product. The barrier created a halo of quality that had not existed when the product was abundant. Censorship. The desire for the banned extends beyond commodities to information. In an age of information warfare, it is crucial to understand that we do not need to receive a message to be influenced by it. Sometimes, the mere act of censorship is enough. When a speech opposing co-ed dorms was banned at the University of North Carolina, students became more opposed to co-ed dorms, without ever hearing the arguments. The censorship itself validated the suppressed position. We tend to view banned information as more desirable and, dangerously, as more true. This applies even in the sterile environment of a courtroom. When a judge admonishes a jury to disregard a piece of evidence, he is effectively censoring it. Research suggests that jurors, feeling their freedom to consider all data restricted, often weigh the inadmissible evidence more heavily than if it had been allowed without comment. The scarcity of information drives its value. This was proven commercially in a study involving beef buyers. One group received a standard sales pitch. A second group was told that imported beef was likely to be scarce. A third group was told about the scarcity, but also that this news was exclusive information not generally available to the public. The third group bought 6 times as much as the first. The information itself was scarce, doubling the potency of the compliance lever. Optimal conditions. The scarcity principle, like other weapons of influence, is sharper under certain conditions. To understand when we are most vulnerable, we can look to a study involving chocolate chip cookies. Participants were asked to rate a cookie taken from a jar. For some, the jar contained 10 cookies. For others, only 2. Consistent with the principle, the cookie from the jar of 2 was rated more favorably than the one from the jar of 10. But the experiment went further. New scarcity, costlier cookies, and civil conflict. Some participants started with a jar of 10 cookies, which was then removed and replaced by a jar of 2. These participants, who experienced a drop from abundance to scarcity, rated the cookies significantly higher than those who had faced a constant scarcity of 2. We value things most when they have recently been taken away. This finding illuminates the psychology of political revolution. Revolutions are most likely to erupt not when conditions are consistently miserable, but when a period of improvement is followed by a sharp decline. The American Revolution was not born of chronic poverty, but of a prosperous populace facing new British taxes that threatened their established standard of living. Similarly, the civil rights riots of the 1960s in the United States occurred after a period of tangible progress was met with stalled changes in housing and employment. The loss of established progress is far more volatile than the absence of progress. Freedoms once granted will not be relinquished without a fight. Competition for scarce resources. Foolish fury. The cookie experiment revealed one final explosive insight. When the jar of 10 cookies was replaced by 2, some participants were told the reduction was due to a mistake. Others were told the cookies had been given to other raters because of high demand. The cookies that became scarce through social demand were rated the highest of all. We want a scarce item most when we are in competition for it. This dynamic creates a feeding frenzy. In the wild, fishermen toss chum into the water to whip fish into a competitive madness where they will bite at bare hooks. Department stores use loss leaders, a few deeply discounted items, to trigger a similar frenzy among shoppers, who then blindly grab at any merchandise in the heat of the contest. The logic of the purchase dissolves in the acid of rivalry. This fever can infect even the most sophisticated minds. In the Great Poseidon Auction, executives from ABC, CBS, and NBC entered a bidding war for the rights to air the movie The Poseidon Adventure. Caught in the trap of scarcity plus rivalry, the bids soared beyond any rational projection of profit. The winner, ABC, paid a price that guaranteed $1 million loss. The winner had been flayed by the competition, paying a tuition of millions to learn that the desire to beat a rival can override the desire for profit. My brother, Richard, financed his education by exploiting this exact vulnerability. He bought used cars and resold them, but his innovation was in the scheduling. He would invite 3 interested buyers to inspect the car at the same time. The first arrival would behave rationally, pointing out dents and negotiating price. But when the second buyer pulled into the driveway, the psychology shifted. The car was now a contested resource. The first buyer, fearing loss to the lurking newcomer, would drop his critical analysis and buy the car on the spot to secure the victory. The competition masked the reality that the car was no better than it had been 10 minutes prior. It was simply more fought over. Defense. Defending against scarcity is difficult because the principle triggers an emotional arousal that suppresses our ability to think. When we see a prize vanishing, our blood rises and our focus narrows. Intellectual knowledge of the tactic is often too slow to save us. We need a visceral alarm. We must learn to use the rising tide of arousal itself as the signal to stop. When we feel that flush of panic or greed in a compliance situation, we must pause. We must calm the agitation and ask a crucial question. Why do we want this item? If we want it for the sake of owning it, for the social or psychological thrill of possession, then its scarcity is a valid indicator of its value. Rare things are indeed good for showing off, but if we want the item for its utility, to drive the car, eat the cookie, or use the appliance, we must remember a vital truth. Scarce things do not taste, drive, or work any better than abundant things. The cookie from the jar of 2 tasted exactly the same as the cookie from the jar of 10. The joy is in the possessing, not the using. By separating these 2 desires, we can stand in the middle of a feeding frenzy, calm and immune, recognizing that the bait is just a bare hook. Chapter 7. Commitment and Consistency, Hobgoblins of the Mind. Every year, Amazon offers its fulfillment center employees a peculiar deal. Once a year, the company presents them with an offer to quit. Known as the Pay to Quit program, the proposal is simple. If an employee chooses to leave, Amazon will pay them a bonus of up to $5,000. The offer appears counterintuitive for a business that relies heavily on the efficiency and retention of its workforce. Why would a company pay its own staff to leave? The official explanation is that Amazon only wants employees who truly want to be there. But there is a deeper psychological mechanism at play, one that transforms a simple choice into a binding force of loyalty. By rejecting the money and choosing to stay, the employee does not merely remain in a job, they make a commitment to it. This act of choosing, especially when it involves turning down a tangible reward, solidifies their dedication in a way that a standard paycheck never could. The consistency drive. This phenomenon is driven by a potent weapon of social influence, the desire to be, and to appear, consistent with what we have already done. Once we make a choice or take a stand, we encounter personal and interpersonal pressures to behave consistently with that commitment. These pressures cause us to respond in ways that justify our earlier decision. We simply convince ourselves that we have made the right choice, and, no matter the contrary evidence, we feel better about our decision. Consider the behavior of bettors at a racetrack. 30 seconds before putting down their money, they are tentative and uncertain about their horse's chances. 30 seconds after the bet is placed, they are significantly more optimistic and confident. Nothing about the horse's speed, the track conditions, or the competition has changed. The only shift is in the bettor's mind. Having made a final decision, the need for consistency dictates that they must now believe in that decision with absolute certainty. The act of commitment itself generates its own support system. This drive for consistency is not merely a quirk, it is a central motivator of human behavior. It is highly valued in society, associated with personal and intellectual strength. The person whose beliefs, words, and deeds don't match is seen as confused, two-faced, or even mentally unstable. Conversely, a high degree of consistency is associated with logic, rationality, stability, and honesty. Because it is so generally useful, we fall into the habit of being automatically consistent, even in situations where it is not the sensible way to be. The quick fix. Automatic consistency functions as a shield against thought. It offers a shortcut through the complexities of modern life. Once we have made up our minds about an issue, stubborn consistency allows us the luxury of never having to think hard about it again. We don't have to sift through the blizzard of information we encounter every day to identify relevant facts. We don't have to expend the mental energy to weigh the pros and cons. We don't have to make any further tough decisions. Instead, all we have to do when confronted with the issue is turn on our consistency tape, click, and we know just what to believe, say, or do. We need only believe, say, or do whatever is consistent with our earlier decision. The allure of this luxury is immense. It allows us to glide through our days without the rigorous demands of constant analysis. But this shield has a double edge. If automatic consistency protects us from the labor of thinking, it can also protect us from the consequences of thinking. The fortress of foolishness. Sometimes we do not avoid thinking because it is hard work, but because the answers it provides are unacceptable. We may not want to face the clear, unwelcome conclusions that straight thinking would produce. In these moments, automatic consistency becomes a fortress, a place to hide from troubling realizations. This dynamic was vividly illustrated during a lecture on transcendental meditation, TM. The recruiters claimed their program could offer everything from inner peace to the ability to fly through walls. A university logician in the audience systematically dismantled their arguments, exposing contradictions and lack of evidence. The recruiters were stumped. Yet, at the end of the session, the audience rushed forward to pay the $75 fee to sign up. When asked why, one young man revealed the terrifying logic of his compliance. He was failing his college courses and was desperate for a solution. He had come hoping TM was the answer. When the logician started tearing the theory apart, the student felt a surge of panic. He realized that if he went home and thought about what the logician said, he would never sign up. He would be left without hope. So he signed up immediately, locking himself into a commitment before logic could destroy his potential salvation. He used consistency to build a wall against reason, seek and hide. Compliance professionals are masters at unlocking this fortress for their own gain. They structure their interactions so that our own need to be consistent leads directly to their benefit. A classic example is found in the toy industry's solution to the post-holiday slump. Toy manufacturers face a dilemma. They make the bulk of their sales in December, but they need to maintain sales in January and February, when parents are typically toyed out and financially drained. Standard advertising or price reductions often fail to move these resistant parents. The solution is an ingenious application of consistency. In the run-up to Christmas, manufacturers run attractive TV ads for special, high-profile toys. Children, naturally, extract promises from their parents to buy these specific items for Christmas. The genius lies in the next step. The manufacturers deliberately undersupply the stores with these promised toys. Parents find the shelves empty and are forced to buy other toys of equal value to have something under the tree. The manufacturers make sure these substitutes are plentiful. Then, after Christmas, the companies start running the ads for the special toys again. The children, seeing the ads, remind their parents of their unfulfilled promises. You promised, you promised. To teach their children the value of keeping one's word, the parents trudge back to the store and buy the toy they had originally promised. The result? The manufacturers sell 2 sets of toys instead of 1, and the parents walk away believing they are simply being consistent, responsible adults, unaware that their integrity has been leveraged for profit. Commitment is the key. If consistency is the engine of compliance, commitment is the key that starts it. Once a person takes a stand, there is a natural tendency to behave in ways that are stubbornly aligned with that stand. Compliance professionals use this by inducing us to make small initial commitments that can be leveraged into much larger ones. This is the principle behind the foot-in-the-door technique. In a famous study, researchers posing as volunteer workers asked homeowners in a California neighborhood to accept and display a small 3-inch square sign that read, "Be a safe driver." It was such a trifling request that nearly everyone agreed. 2 weeks later, a different volunteer asked these same homeowners to allow a massive, poorly lettered billboard reading "Drive carefully" to be installed on their front lawns, completely obscuring their view. Astonishingly, 76% of those who had accepted the small sign agreed to the billboard. In contrast, only 17% of residents who hadn't been approached with the small request agreed. The small act of displaying the tiny sign had changed the homeowners' self-image. They began to see themselves as public-spirited citizens who acted on their civic principles. When the larger request came, they complied to be consistent with this newly formed view of themselves. This finding carries a frightening implication. Even trivial commitments can lead to significant changes in self-concept and future behavior. Hearts and minds. The most effective commitments are those that change a person's inner view of themselves. Once a person's self-image is altered, they will naturally comply with a whole range of requests that are consistent with this new view. But not all commitments are created equal. To effectively change a self-image, a commitment must be active, public, effortful, and freely chosen. This constellation of factors was ruthlessly exploited by the Chinese communists during the Korean War to indoctrinate American prisoners of war. The Chinese did not rely on brute force. Instead, they used the lenient policy, a sophisticated psychological assault based on commitment and consistency. They started small, asking prisoners to make mild statements like, "The United States is not perfect." Once a prisoner made such a statement, he was pushed to elaborate, perhaps by listing examples of American imperfections. Then he might be asked to write an essay on the topic. Later, his name and essay might be broadcast on anti-American radio programs. Suddenly, the prisoner found himself labeled a collaborator. Shit. To resolve the internal conflict, he would often change his self-image to align with the label and his own actions, resulting in even more extensive acts of collaboration. The magic act. Our own behavior provides the best evidence of our beliefs. The Chinese knew that writing was a particularly powerful form of active commitment. A written declaration is physical evidence that an act has occurred. It cannot be easily denied or forgotten. Furthermore, it can be shown to others, persuading them that the author genuinely believes what was written. This creates a double bind. The author feels pressure from within to bring his self-image into line with his action, and pressure from without to adjust his image according to how others perceive him. This magic of writing is utilized by corporations like Amway, which asks its salespeople to set goals and write them down. The act of writing transforms a wish into a commitment. Similarly, testimonial contests run by large companies, "Tell us why you like this product in 25 words or less," are not merely about gathering praise. They are about getting thousands of people to go on record, in writing, about the positive qualities of a product. In searching for things to praise to win a prize, the writer convinces themselves that the praise is justified, the public eye. Public commitments are lasting commitments. Whenever one takes a stand that is visible to others, there arises a drive to maintain that stand to look like a consistent person. The Chinese arranged for the pro-communist statements of prisoners to be posted around camp or read to discussion groups. The more public the stand, the more reluctant the prisoner was to change it. This principle explains why weight loss clinics often require clients to write down their goals and show them to friends and family. The shame of failing a public promise provides the external scaffolding needed to support a shaky internal resolve. It also explains why juries that take public votes by a show of hands are more likely to become hung juries than those that vote by secret ballot. Once a juror has publicly stated a position, the need to appear consistent makes it difficult to back down, even in the face of new evidence. The effort. Extra. The more effort that goes into a commitment, the greater its ability to influence the attitudes of the person who made it. This is why fraternity hazing rituals and tribal initiation ceremonies are so often harsh and demanding. A pledge who suffers through beatings, cold, thirst, or humiliation to join a group must value membership in that group highly to justify the pain. If membership were given away freely, it would be valued lightly. The severity of the initiation ensures that the new member will be fiercely committed to the group, having paid a high price for entry. The group's survival depends on this loyalty, so the barriers to entry remain high, despite attempts to ban such practices. The inner choice. Perhaps the most critical condition for a commitment to be effective is that it must be viewed as voluntary. We accept inner responsibility for a behavior when we think we have chosen to perform it in the absence of strong outside pressure. A large reward or a strong threat is a form of outside pressure. It may produce immediate compliance, but it will not produce long-term commitment. In fact, it may prevent us from accepting inner responsibility for the act. This has profound implications for child rearing. If parents want their children to truly believe in a rule, for example, that lying is wrong, they must avoid using heavy threats or bribes. A child who avoids lying because of a severe threat is not learning that lying is wrong. They are learning that getting caught is dangerous. To achieve true commitment, the parent must provide a reason that is just strong enough to produce the behavior, but not so strong that the child sees it as the obvious reason for their compliance. The child must feel that they chose the behavior themselves. Growing legs to stand on. Once a person makes a commitment that produces inner change, the change takes on a life of its own. It grows its own legs. The compliance professional does not need to constantly reinforce the change. The pressure for consistency does the work. A person who begins to view themselves as public-spirited will automatically start seeing things differently, finding new reasons to support their civic-mindedness. Even if the original reason for the behavior is removed, these newly discovered reasons may be enough to sustain the commitment. This is the basis of the low-ball tactic used by car dealers. A dealer might offer a car at a very low price to get the customer to decide to buy. Once the decision is made, the customer begins to build a support system of reasons for the purchase. The car's safety features, the color, the mileage. Then, at the last minute, the low price is removed due to a calculation error or a manager's refusal. Astonishingly, many customers will still buy the car at the higher price. The initial low price was merely a hook to generate the commitment. Once the customer generated their own reasons for wanting the car, the hook could be removed without losing the sale. The commitment stood on its own legs. Standing up for the public good. The lowball tactic can also be used for social good. In a study on energy conservation, homeowners were promised that their names would be publicized in the newspaper if they saved fuel. This induced a commitment to conservation. Later, they were told that the publicity would not be possible. Rather than returning to their old wasteful habits, these homeowners actually increased their conservation efforts. The promise of publicity had been the only external reason for their behavior. Once it was removed, they were free to view themselves as truly conservation-minded citizens. Their commitment became fully internal, and their behavior reflected this deepened resolve. Defense. The only effective defense against the weapon of consistency is to differentiate between good consistency and foolish consistency. We must listen to the signals our bodies send us. Stomach signs. The first signal occurs in the pit of the stomach. It is that sinking feeling we get when we realize we are being trapped into complying with a request we know we don't want to perform. When this happens, we must ignore the pressure to be consistent and tell the requester exactly what they are doing. We must explain that we refuse to allow ourselves to be locked into a mechanical sequence of commitment and consistency when we know we are being tricked. Heart of hearts signs. Sometimes it is not obvious that we are being taken. We may have built up a system of justifications that blinds us to the truth. In these cases, we must look to our heart of hearts, the place where we cannot fool ourselves. To access this, we must ask ourselves the crucial question: knowing what I know now, if I could go back in time, would I make the same choice? We must listen for the first flash of feeling that answers this question, before our rationalizing mind takes over. This pure feeling is the truth, and it can save us from the trap of foolish consistency. Chapter 8. Unity. The we is the shared me. The influence principle of unity is rooted in a simple but profound shift in perception. It moves beyond the idea that someone is merely like us, similarity, to the realization that someone is of us. When we perceive another person as a member of our tribe, whether that tribe is defined by race, ethnicity, nationality, family, or even political affiliation, our conduct toward them changes dramatically. The boundaries of the self expand to include the other. In this state of we-ness, the interests of the other become our own. We become more willing to agree, to trust, to help, and to forgive. The we becomes the shared me. The unity principle. This merging of identities is not metaphorical. It is a psychological reality with measurable consequences. Neuroscientific research indicates that when we think about ourselves and when we think about close others, the same brain circuitry is engaged. This cross-excitation leads to a confusion of self and other, a blurring of lines that explains the intense favoritism we show to members of our in-groups. Inside the we circle, influence is easier. We don't just like our own, we fight for them, protect them, and follow their lead. This tribalism is not a cultural artifact but a fundamental aspect of human nature. evolved to advantage our groups and, by extension, our own genetic survival. It manifests in everyday business, as seen in the success of Ali Reda, a car salesman who outsold the legendary Joe Girard by leveraging his identity within a tight-knit Arab-American community. It appears in financial scandals, where affinity schemes like Bernie Madoff's Ponzi fraud prey on the trust inherent within religious or ethnic groups. It dominates politics, where party loyalty often trumps ideology and even truth, leading members to believe the lies that protect their group, blue lies, and to follow the lead of fellow partisans even when they are demonstrably less competent. Unity 1. Belonging together. The sense of we-ness arises primarily from two sources: belonging together and acting together. Belonging is often rooted in biology and geography. Kinship. The ultimate form of unity is genetic. We are biologically programmed to ensure the survival of our genetic copies. This drive is so potent that we are willing to sacrifice our own resources and even our lives for our kin. This kinship premium is evident in the willingness of people to donate organs or rush into burning buildings for family members. But the power of kinship can be harnessed by those outside the bloodline through the use of familial language. Calling a group a brotherhood or sisterhood, referring to a motherland or forefathers, triggers the same self-sacrificial responses. Warren Buffett, in a masterstroke of persuasion, once assured shareholders of the future of Berkshire Hathaway by stating he would tell them what he would tell his own family. By invoking the family frame, he claimed the highest level of trustworthiness and secured the loyalty of his investors. Place. We also feel a deep unity with those who share our physical space, our home, our locality, our region. This localism is an evolutionary heuristic. Historically, those near us were likely to be genetically related. This tendency explains why a Nazi guard, amidst the mechanized slaughter of a concentration camp, spared a prisoner simply because he recognized him as a man from his hometown. It explains why the Japanese High Command, allies of Nazi Germany, refused to exterminate Jewish refugees in Shanghai after a rabbi cleverly reframed their identity not as foreign enemies but as fellow Asians. We are Asian, like you. The shared identity of place trumped the political alliance. Unity 2. Acting together. If belonging together is about shared roots, acting together is about shared rhythm. When people act in unison, marching, singing, dancing, chanting, they become unitized. Co-creation. The act of creating something together dissolves the barriers between individuals. This is the IKEA effect amplified. We love what we build, and if we build it with someone, we come to love them too. This principle is effectively used in the cooperative learning technique in schools, where students must teach each other parts of a lesson to succeed. It transforms the classroom from a competitive arena into a collaborative web, reducing prejudice and increasing self-esteem. In the business world, asking for advice, rather than just feedback or opinions, is a powerful way to recruit a co-creator. When we ask, "What do you think I should do?" we invite the other person to merge with us on the problem, turning a critic into an accomplice. Synchrony. Moving together in time creates a visceral sense of merger. Armies march, tribes dance, and congregations sing because these synchronized actions generate loyalty and self-sacrifice. Research shows that even simple synchronous acts like tapping a finger to the same beat or walking in step increase liking and the willingness to help others, even at a cost to oneself. This synchronization of behavior leads to a synchronization of minds. Defense. The unity principle, like all weapons of influence, has a dark side. It can lead to the corrupting power of we. In organizations that emphasize a we culture, employees may feel justified in covering up the unethical actions of their colleagues to protect the group. Police officers protect bad cops. Unions defend incompetent workers. Corporations hide the misdeeds of their executives. The we can become a fortress that shields wrongdoing from scrutiny. To defend against this, organizations must establish a no-tolerance policy for ethical violations that is framed not as a betrayal of the group, but as a protection of it. By defining ethical misconduct as a threat to the group's integrity and survival, the same unity principle that once enabled the behavior can be turned against it. We must recognize that while the we is a powerful source of support and connection, it must not become a license for complicity. Chapter 9. Instant Influence. Primitive Consent for an Automatic Age. The journey through the landscape of persuasion brings us back to the beginning, to the mother turkey and her reliance on a single mechanical cheep sound. We started by observing that such rigid, lower animal behavior seems far removed from the complex cognitive capabilities of human beings. We pride ourselves on our ability to weigh information, consider context, and make rational decisions. Yet, as we have seen, the modern human is increasingly behaving like the mother turkey. We are frequently bypassing our sophisticated decision-making apparatus in favor of primitive automatic compliance. We are reverting to a state where a single trigger feature, a price, a title, a laugh track, is enough to launch a full sequence of behavior. This is not because we have become less intelligent, but because our world has become too complex. Primitive automaticity. Evolution has equipped us with a magnificent brain capable of processing immense amounts of information. However, that capacity is not infinite. To function efficiently, we have developed mental shortcuts, judgmental heuristics that allow us to act quickly without analyzing every single variable in our environment. We accept that expensive is good, that experts are right, and that if the crowd is doing it, I should too. These rules of thumb are generally reliable and absolutely necessary. Without them, we would stand frozen, cataloging and appraising every detail of every transaction, unable to make a decision before the opportunity vanished. In many ways, this reliance on single cues aligns us with the lower animals. A lower animal's cognitive limitations force it to rely on a subset of information to survive. We, conversely, are being forced into the same corner not by our own limitations, but by the external saturation of our environment. We have built a world so rich in information, so fast-paced and so intricate that we often lack the time, energy, and mental bandwidth to use our fully developed rationality. When we are rushed, stressed, uncertain, or distracted, we revert to the primitive. We focus on a single piece of good evidence and click whir, we act. Modern automaticity. This tendency is accelerating. We are living in the age of modern automaticity. The sheer volume of information available to us is exploding. We have moved from a society of slow, generational knowledge to one of instant, global data. The information age has been heralded as an era of enlightenment, but for the individual trying to navigate it, it often feels like an avalanche. Consider the marketplace. A generation ago, buying a toaster involved choosing between 2 or 3 well-known brands at a local store. Today, a consumer is faced with hundreds of options online, thousands of user reviews, detailed technical specifications, and fluctuating prices. To analyze this glut of data thoroughly would paralyze us. So we stop looking at the details and look for the shortcuts. 5 stars, a bestseller badge, or a recommendation from an influencer. We are trading accuracy for speed because the pace of modern life demands it. Technology, for all its benefits, contributes to this cognitive jamming. The devices that were meant to serve us now demand our constant attention, fragmenting our focus and leaving us fatigued. In this state of mental exhaustion, we are even more susceptible to the levers of influence. We are less likely to spot the trick in the free gift, less likely to question the validity of the expert, and more likely to follow the herd blindly. We are building a world that is too complex for our ancient brains to handle without these shortcuts. Shortcuts shall be sacred. Recognizing this, we must adopt a warlike stance toward those who would exploit our necessary shortcuts. If we agree that we must rely on rules of thumb like social proof and authority to survive the modern deluge of data, then those rules of thumb must be reliable. The profiteer who salts the tip jar, the advertiser who uses a fake doctor, or the politician who manufactures a fake grassroots movement is not just tricking us out of a few dollars or a vote. They are sabotaging the very machinery we use to cope with our lives. If the signals we rely on, scarcity, reciprocity, liking, are systematically counterfeited, we become confused and hesitant. We lose the ability to make efficient decisions. We are forced to retreat into a slower, more laborious mode of thinking. Or worse, we respond randomly, losing our agency entirely. Therefore, the fabrication of these influence triggers is not a minor commercial annoyance. It is an assault on our cognitive survival. Our response must be aggressive. We cannot simply shrug off the manipulation. When we catch a compliance professional faking the data, putting a laugh track on a bad show, using a deceptive "going out of business" sign, or listing false testimonials, we must retaliate. We must refuse to buy their products. We must voice our displeasure to the management, and we must warn others. We must make it unprofitable for them to tamper with our shortcuts. We are in a war for the integrity of our decision-making processes. By defending the sanctity of these shortcuts, we are defending our right to navigate the modern world with efficiency and rationality. We must ensure that the automatic click leads to a beneficial whir and not to our own exploitation. Summary. The book concludes with a warning and a call to arms. As our world grows more complex, the value of our shortcuts increases. We need them now more than ever. Consequently, the crime of falsifying the triggers that activate these shortcuts becomes more heinous. We must distinguish between the compliance professional who points out a natural psychological trigger, true scarcity, genuine authority, and the one who manufactures a fake one. The former is a partner in an efficient exchange. The latter is a saboteur. To survive and thrive in the automatic age, we must ruthlessly expose and reject the counterfeiters, preserving the reliability of the cues that guide us through the thicket of modern life.